And good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We are so jam-packed today. Before our show is done, some of the best stuff we've had from Jake Fromm, where I really had a chance to ask Jake a lot of the questions on many of your minds about what we're seeing from the Georgia offense here right now. When Kirby Smart says, this is the same offense we've always run. Specifically, what does that mean from a guy who kind of understands more about this certainly than I do? Jake will talk about that. What Georgia needs to do to complete more deep shots perhaps down the field to create the kind of explosive plays we say that we've said we would like to see more of. Jake will talk to you more about that on our show here coming up. Mike Griffith also stops by. In addition to that, one of the biggest critics of Georgia over the course of the last couple of months has kind of changed his tune a little bit, and I think that's a pretty good contextual reminder for some of us. We'll get into that. Really fascinating stuff from Kirby Smart halftime on Saturday, and there's a weird backstory to this too, which we'll delve in a little bit on, but mostly it's just kind of fun to kind of see behind the scenes a pretty cool moment for Georgia football. We'll get to that. And the head coach of the team that Georgia plays on Saturday has given Georgia about the best compliment that you can probably get. Now, it's its fans here that's getting the compliment. So Georgia fans taking center stage ahead of Saturday's night game between the hedges. That seems like a pretty good place for us to start here right now. So jam-packed show, lots to discuss. Let's get it going. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I am so excited for Saturday. Cannot wait for Georgia and UAB. Rare night game for us here between the hedges and a chance to see the incredible atmosphere that Georgia fans are capable of producing there at Sanford Stadium. I was excited about this already, but something that UAB coach Trent Dilfer has said has made me even more excited for, I think, what we're about to experience on Saturday. Dilfer, who I think is kind of a cool figure, and I think it's a little bit of an unorthodox hire by UAB. Dilfer's coached in high school. Obviously, he's a former Super Bowl winning quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, former kind of, I guess you call him head coach of the Elite 11. I believe that's what his title was, kind of the leader of that organization, the event involving the top high school quarterbacks. So Dilfer's got an interesting football resume, now a coach here at the Division I level, the FBS level with UAB. And Dilfer, speaking to his reporters this week, was asked, hey, Trent, you've played in a lot of big-time environments in college football. You've seen a lot of stuff. And Dilfer wanted to make it known that even though he's had a certainly long list of sporting accomplishments and had a long life in the sporting world, in terms of what he believes his UAB Blazers team is going to kind of interact with on Saturday night, it's rarely been like this. I thought what Dilfer said was so much fun to consider, really, really cool, an amazing compliment to Georgia fans, and kind of a fun way to begin today's show. This is what Trent Dilfer said this week.
I've never played anything like this. I've been to one SEC game. My daughter's being recruited at the University of Alabama, and we went to the Ole Miss Alabama game. And to this day, I think the Kentucky Derby is the coolest thing I've ever been able to go to, live sports. I think it's better than Super Bowls. An SEC football game at night is way better atmosphere than a Super Bowl. I think it's the second coolest thing I've ever been to as a spectator. So I'm personally really excited about going to an SEC game at night. It's different. I mean, their slogan is just means more. It's different. It's true.
Doesn't that get you excited about Saturday's game? And maybe Dilfer gamesmanship here. Maybe he's trying to get on Georgia's good side, say a bunch of really nice things, and maybe Georgia will take it easy on UAB on Saturday. I don't know. I'm not going to try to look too deep at this. I think that Dilfer's obviously a very articulate spokesman, and he says something pretty cool about the SEC experience that we all get a chance to be a part of on Saturday. I'm glad he brings it up because, honestly, I think for those of us who were lucky enough to be able to go to games like this, I think it's appropriate to look around and sort of appreciate what is happening. And I do believe that game days at Sanford Stadium have been fun my entire life. But, man, the level of enjoyment that I get out of these rare Saturdays in which we all get a chance to congregate there between the hedges, I just think it's been taken to a higher level. And obviously the Georgia team on the field deserves a lot of credit for that. But honestly, the fans themselves deserve a lot of credit for that. And when you're around the stadium and you're looking around, I hope you get the full appreciation of just how special an environment this is, how much it kind of transcends just the normal, mundane life to be able to be in a building that has that kind of energy. And I think that was proven again on Saturday there as well. It wasn't a night game, but Dilfer's idea of, oh my gosh, there's nothing like it. It rivals anything I've ever seen. Better than a Super Bowl, which can be antiseptic and can be not all that genuine and authentic. Similar to like a Kentucky Derby, which is sort of a once-in-a-lifetime type deal. That's what Dilfer says these SEC night games can kind of be. And what we saw on Saturday, even though it wasn't a night game and even though it was in the rain, the Georgia fans proved capable of kind of creating that sort of, oh my gosh, you had to be there to know what it was like. They proved capable of creating that atmosphere again. And I love the fact that Kirby Smart, and y'all, you got to understand, and many of you know this, Kirby is a no-nonsense dude, right? I mean, he's very, nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes, whatever, I guess analogy you want to use. This is a guy who's super serious about football. But he also recognizes that the vibe around the game contributes to what happens during the game and on the field while the game is being played. And Kirby, when he talks about the Georgia fans, I hope you guys appreciate this. This is not the lip service thing of, I just want to thank the fans. Guys, you guys are great. Thanks a lot. There's a way to do that doesn't really mean very much. There's a way to do that doesn't really, seem all that authentic. But that's not what Kirby says, y'all. And so with Trent Dilfer saying what he said about how incredible he expects the atmosphere to be on Saturday, I think it's appropriate for us here midway through the week before we look fully ahead of what's going to happen this Saturday to look back and say, hey, at a time on Saturday when the game was hanging in the balance, by the way, more on that in a moment in terms of how Georgia responded when everything was on the line on Saturday. But at a time this past Saturday when the game hung in the balance, when it could have tipped one of two ways, and this emerging dynasty could have taken a pretty big stub of the toe, or when it could have figured out what was going on and building off some adversity and marching to victory, Georgia fans said, we want to be a part of this story. We want to be a part of the solution here against South Carolina. We want to help propel our team to victory. And honestly, Kirby Smart, to his credit, after the game on Saturday, was more than happy to give true, genuine, sincere credit right where it deserved. That the momentum that Georgia built in the second half of this game was propelled in part by the fans in the stadium who, as Smart said, never gave up about Georgia's chances of getting back and winning this game. So in light of what Dilfer says about what he expects to see this Saturday, let's remember what we all saw this past Saturday. This is Kirby Smart.
The momentum in the second half was created, number one, by the offense having a really good possession in the second half, but the fan, I think the fans and the feeling of that momentum is a powerful thing. And the momentum of our fans in the second half of sticking with us, sticking by us, and staying with us was incredible, and that momentum turned things around for us and gave us a lot of momentum, so that was good.
I'm obviously a Georgia fan, but I don't get to be in the stands screaming and yelling and doing the things that fans traditionally get to do. I'm working, I'm sitting in the press box, I'm there with the rest of the coastal elites, and we're all being really, really serious and studious and following the action in the field. But I'm constantly watching what's happening in the stands because I love the environment, I love the atmosphere. I think there's something about that that's really contagious. And I think when Kirby Smart says what he's saying there, he's giving you an incredible gift. He's making you feel a part of it. Sports fans, we've liked to sometimes use the phrase we think about our favorite team. Hey, we got to go out there and win this game, or we got to do this, we got to do that. Kirby Smart, in so many words right there, is giving you the freedom to consider yourself part of the team. He's giving yourself the freedom to say, hey, when Georgia accomplishes something, we all play a role in that because we, the fans, have a chance to, if we're lucky enough to be in the stadium, produce the kind of atmosphere that makes a comeback more likely, that makes, building momentum a little easier to do. Kirby Smart very graciously says to all the Georgia fans, you are a part of this the same way the team on the field is trying to get this done. And on that same press conference going back to Saturday, after Georgia pulled away and won the game against South Carolina, Smart went into even more detail about exactly what fans did to make Saturday's win so possible. Let me let you hear Kirby Smart on this topic once again.
It's awesome. I can't put it really into words. I felt it. I felt us taking over the game with the momentum of the fans, and it was like a steamroll, And I think decisions you make as a coach, whether you're doing this, or this, that goes into your thought process because we got momentum. I don't want to lose momentum, so I'm not going to do something silly or stupid right here. Let's keep momentum going, and I think that becomes really important.
So one more small point on this, and then I want to move on because we've got a lot to do here today. Do you know how infrequently Kirby Smart uses a word like awesome? Like, awesome is not a Kirby Smart word to use, right? But when he was asked about the thing the fans did to make the third quarter of that game feel so ripe for opportunity for Georgia, Kirby's like, oh, man, it's awesome. Like, that's not a Kirby Smart thing to say. And the thing that Kirby chose to call awesome after Saturday's game was not one of his players or one of his coaches or one of the things that happened within the framework of the program as we consider it. The thing that Kirby Smart called awesome after Saturday was you, the Georgia fans, for what you did on Saturday to create the opportunity that allowed Georgia to come back and win that game. You deserve a lot of credit for that. Kirby Smart clearly gave it to you. Trent Dilfer says he expects Saturday's game to be better than the Super Bowl, the second best thing in all of sports environments. That may be slightly hyperbolic, but maybe not too far off either. And on Saturday night, I expect it to be really, really cool there as well. We don't get very many chances to be between the hedges for a fun Georgia game. Saturday night, not a great opponent, admittedly. UAB's pretty wretched right now, but a great atmosphere, almost certainly. And I can't wait to see how Georgia fans step up to the opportunity to create a really, really loud and crazy atmosphere for a rare night game there in Sanford Stadium. So that is good stuff. Now, let me transition and talk about something completely different. I think sometimes perspective is important. And I think one of the things I notice, having done this job for as long as I've done it, is that, hey, we love college football. We talk about college football. We argue about college football. We think this, you think that. We go back and forth. That's just the nature of the beast. That's how we show our appreciation for the sport that we all love. But one of the things I kind of notice sometimes is that the magnifying glass we all have for our favorite team, in this case the Georgia Bulldogs, certainly blows things up much bigger than other people have a tendency to look at this. And that's true for both the good things and the bad things. We live, as I like to say, kind of inside the bubble of DawgNation. And when things are really good for Georgia, we blow that up so big. And sometimes when things are not quite so good for Georgia, we have a tendency to probably blow that up and make it also bigger than it probably actually is there as well. And sometimes the perspective from kind of outside the bubble of DawgNation, from 10,000 feet or somewhere like that, sometimes the clarity that's gained from zooming out a little bit is kind of an important thing to go and consider. So I want to highlight something here for a moment. And we've talked about this guy a pretty good bit over the course of the offseason. It's Reese Davis. And Davis has been famous on this show because a lot during the offseason, Davis was going around making his case that mighty Michigan was going to be the number one team in college football, and it was not going to be Georgia. Now, you might think, given the fact that Georgia through 3 games has not exactly looked as great as its last 2 national championship teams, at least through the first quarter of the regular season here, you might think someone like Reese Davis would be ready to step up and say, see, I told you so. I told you mighty Michigan was better than Georgia. I told you Georgia had its problems. I was right. I told you before the season began, Georgia wasn't number one. You might think that's what Reese Davis was saying right now. But this week on an ESPN show, I guess it was a podcast, on an ESPN podcast, Davis has actually done a little bit of an about-face, that he's actually seen a lot from Georgia, Saturday's game in particular, that he actually likes. So this is important perspective here, that some of us have seen some stuff from Georgia through 3 games we're a little concerned about, and we think needs to be corrected. We think it needs to be fixed. But we're zoomed in very closely because of how much we love Georgia football. Someone who's not zoomed in quite as close, someone who has a little bit of a zoomed out perspective on Georgia, perhaps we should maybe consider his perspective on this, because a former UGA critic now sees a lot he likes with the Dogs. Reese Davis now says he's got Georgia as his number 1 team. This is interesting. It's from Reese Davis this week. Take a listen to this.
I changed my number 1 vote in the AP poll from Florida State to Georgia. And you say, well, why Georgia? You had Georgia behind Michigan. Florida State won. They didn't look impressive. They were fortunate to escape against Boston College. When Georgia was challenged, Georgia shifted gears and basically said, nope, not going to happen. So when I was evaluating Sunday morning how to rank the teams, how to stack them up, who do I trust to do that? Who do I trust now to totally finish the deal? Georgia, South Carolina's, a solid team, not a great team. So it's not like a big accomplishment. But they played great in the first half, and Georgia just slammed the door in the second.
Now, I don't play that because Reese Davis's opinion is the be-all, end-all for college football, nor do I play that because Davis is saying something so complimentary about Georgia. My purpose in playing that is, hey, a lot of us have been very zoomed in on Georgia as of late. And to be honest with you, the response to the game against South Carolina, I would say from within DawgNation, has been more negative than positive. Well, here is Davis saying, actually, I see some things that I like. Actually, Georgia, who I wasn't quite so sure was my number one team, now I think they are. And I think it's important for Georgia fans to possibly consider the idea that maybe Reese Davis is right, and that maybe some of our, harping on, some of the imperfections with Georgia, specifically on the offensive side of the ball right now, maybe those are all issues that can be rectified as the season goes on. And maybe what we actually saw from Georgia is the kind of team that's perhaps poised to take that next step, working to get better, working to improve, and working to be ready for the moments that truly matter. Because it's not just Davis right now who's perhaps having a more favorable appraisal of Georgia than some Georgia fans do. In fact, some of those folks out there that don't have a dog in the fight, that don't have any kind of fan interest, we would presume, they are also looking at Georgia pretty favorably right now too. And these are the particular college football observers that are willing to put their money where their mouth is. I thought this was interesting from Circus Sports. I'm going to show you this on the screen. Circus Sports is a sports book. And when you look at, betting on Georgia here right now for the game against UAB on Saturday, apparently there are some big bets rolling in on Georgia right now, so much so that according to Circus Sports, that one of the biggest line movers for them has been Georgia for this week. Within the last 24 hours, we find out that the Georgia UAB line, which opened with Georgia as a 37-point favorite, is now Georgia at a 42-point favorite for the game on Saturday. Now, some of that's because UAB truly is wretched. As we told you yesterday, they were down 42-3 at one point to Louisiana Lafayette last week. But also some of this is, hey, Georgia as a 37-point favorite in a game like this. The betting public out there saying, we think Georgia's actually undervalued. So Reese Davis, a former critic, says, actually, based on what I saw against South Carolina, I think Georgia should be number one. Bettors who are willing to put their money where their mouth is, they get financially punished if they're wrong. They also look at this and say, we kind of like Georgia here right now. We think they're ready to break out in this game against UAB on Saturday. Now, who knows who's right and who's wrong, but I do think the perspective is important to consider. That even though Georgia fans have had a little bit of a harsh evaluation at times from some of what they saw from their team against the Gamecocks, people who are a little bit less emotionally involved seem to be a little bit less harsh in terms of their overall evaluation. So what is the real Georgia? What is the true Georgia? It may be a little while before we find out, but more information can be gained from Saturday's game. My name's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. 9:45, we start first and 15, DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app. After that, it's 10 a.m. across all video platforms, radio, Athens, Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts, however you find them. All the podcast platforms there as well, kind of the on-demand audio version of our show. It's our first platform. It's still our biggest platform on most days, and we are so thankful for those that tune in on a podcast. I've always had a special sense of pride about our podcast, folks, so thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us. We really, really appreciate that, and a special sense of pride from me as well to tell you about our folks at Breda Pest Management. Longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation, have been with us now for a while, but they're also the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. So when you're sitting there in Sanford Stadium on Saturday night, you look around and you see the better than a Super Bowl atmosphere that Trent Dilfer says you're going to see between the hedges, just know that when the fans are rocking, the termites are outside looking in. They're not inside. The bugs, the critters, like the flying squirrels and stuff. That's one of the things that, you ever talk to Matt Brady, I'll tell you about that. Like in Georgia, you can get anyway, like flying squirrels and things like that. But not with Breda Pest Management. They keep all that stuff on the outside. That's not getting into Sanford Stadium. It's not getting into any of the athletic venues there, nor is it going to get into your home there either, because you can make the switch to Breda Pest Management and be just as well protected as all the Georgia athletic venues are from bugs, from critters, from termites, everything else. So please, find them online. It's BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com. And you can have the same pest control provider that's trusted by UGA Athletics. And when you make the switch to Breda, not only do you get their unparalleled service that kind of comes from a company that's been in business since 1975 with 125 employees, you also get more money back in your pocket instantly just for making that decision. It's one of the reasons why I cannot recommend Breda Pest Management strongly enough. So please find them online, BredaPest.com. Once again, BREDA, BredaPest.com. Also, Matt Breda and the folks there, big parts of what we do in high school football on Friday nights. And I'm incredibly proud about that, too. And by the way, Peachtree TV, Friday night, we get Dylan Raiola and the Buford Wolves. Looking forward to that against the Marietta Blue Devils. Fun game on Peachtree TV on Friday night. We can't wait to see you there for that. That's going to be a good time. Good time on our show today, too. We talked about offensive issues for Georgia a moment ago. We're going to get deep into that. I'm talking about deep into that before our show is done. One of the best conversations I think we've had with the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. I recorded this yesterday, the Fromm part of this I recorded yesterday, about when Kirby Smart says we're running the same offense we've been for the last 3 years. What specifically does that mean? And some of the stuff that fans say they want to see, perhaps a few more deep shots down the field. How do you do that when the defense is trying to take that away from you? We kind of got into that with Jake here yesterday when we recorded this. You'll hear that coming up in a moment. I'm really excited for you all to hear our conversation with Jake Fromm yesterday. Some of the best stuff we've had from Jake. We'll get that here coming up in just a little bit. Also, Mike Griffith here in a moment there, too. Prior to that, let's go around the DawgHouse. Poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, let me get on a soapbox for one quick second. There's a lot of times, and I have a tendency to do this, because I grew up a massive sports fan. You got to understand something. When I was a child, I fell in love with sports, and so much of my sort of like sports fandom was shaped by my experiences as a child. And when you have this like great childhood of loving sports, you have a tendency as you get older to want to be like really nostalgic about the sporting world that you grew up in. And you have a tendency, and perhaps some of you have experienced this too, where you want to say, boy, it ain't like it used to be. Boy, sports used to be so much fun, and it used to be so great, and things are changing, and we have a tendency to sometimes think things are changing for the worse. And to be honest with you, sometimes things do change for the worse. Now, not every change is good. Sometimes things are changes for the worse. But to get too wrapped up in, things are changing and that's bad, things are not what they used to be, to get too wrapped up in that, to assume that's always true, is a huge mistake. Because if we look around and if our eyes are open and if we really notice what's happening around us, I think we see all the time things that are actually changes for the better. Let me give you a quick example here. There are experiences now that sports fans get a chance to have that would have been unimaginable even just a few years ago, less than a decade or so ago. This would have been unimaginable. For instance, I believe the SEC network is one of those things. Now, a lot of y'all know I don't love a lot of stuff about ESPN, and I'm pretty suspicious about ESPN as a long-range partner of the SEC. I'm pretty worried about that. I think the ESPN folks, I think they got some real problems right now, and their ability to be a long-range partner for the SEC, I'm not quite so sure about. But when we look at the impact that the SEC network, which is owned by ESPN, when we look at the SEC network and its impact on SEC sports, to me, it has been undeniably positive. We get more access to sports other than football than we ever got before. That's a really cool thing. But we also, from time to time, get windows into football games that we would never get if not for the SEC network. For instance, I know a lot of you have been reacting to what the SEC network has been showing over the course of the last couple of days. I guess it's from a TV show, but most of us are kind of seeing this on social media of kind of behind the scenes with Georgia's win against South Carolina. Now, when I post the show, I'll put the link up so you can see the video of this. I'm not going to play the video here right now because it's not my video, but I do want to play just a tiny clip of the audio of halftime Georgia. They're losing to South Carolina 14-3. You've got, Javon Bullard, he steps up and speaks. Cedric Von Granger, he steps up and speaks. Jamon Dumas-Johnson's challenging the team. And then Kirby Smart steps up and speaks too. And the thing that a lot of folks are going to find fascinating about the Kirby Smart speech at halftime is, especially if you're watching the game, you're like, Kirby's going to lay into these guys at halftime, and Georgia's going to come out kicking the door down of the locker room to get back on the field, and they're going to rip South Carolina's head off. But that's not what Kirby Smart did at halftime of the game on Saturday. And we wouldn't know about this if it wasn't for the SEC network. A really cool thing that sports fans here in 2023 get a chance to enjoy. Let me give you a couple of seconds here of Smart from halftime on Saturday. Perhaps a little bit different version of Kirby than you would have expected to see. This is halftime from South Carolina.
This is what we train for. This is what we work for. This is who we are. We sat right here and we got an identity game against Missouri on the road. You know what? It was very similar to this. It was very similar to this. It was sloppy. It was nasty. It wasn't pretty. And then we came out and we found a way. We always said it would not be pretty. Here's the goal for the second half. We're going to get about 6 possessions on offense. 6 possessions. Y'all got me? Including the first one. We're going to score on 4 of them, okay? They might score once more on defense, but that's it. You understand? And we're going to win the game. We're going to come back in here and have a good time and figure out how we can get better. But this is what I need. This is what I need. Anybody listening? We need to win one moment at a time.
So the video actually gets better. I'm only playing you a short clip. The video actually gets better from there. I just want to give you a brief taste of this. And, like, how incredible is that, right? Like, I could sit there and listen to a great motivational speech from a coach with that music underneath. I could do that for hours. And just, like, as you're working out or you're going through your day, I mean, like, just sort of get you fired up. But that's not Kirby peeling paint off the walls. That's not Kirby saying, I want you to eat. Or that's not Kirby, saying some of the stuff that he said at the halftime of Florida, a couple of years ago. This is not expletive filled. This is not, this is not the most intense version of Kirby Smart. And I think that's a very interesting choice that Smart makes there. Now, we've also got some sort of, I guess, rumor mill stuff as it relates to some of this. I'm going to show you this tweet on the screen. It comes from a guy who works for I guess you call it like an NIL type outlet known as the Players Lounge. His name is J.C. Shelton. So Shelton relays this on Twitter, which I still call it. Some of y'all call it X. Kirby Smart told Georgia running back Jacob Hardy, that's a walk-on, why he didn't tear into the players at halftime versus South Carolina. Here's the quote from Hardy about what Kirby told him. He says, I was about to tear y'all up. But right before I walked in, a sports psychologist for us walked up to me and said, don't get on them. Y'all got this. Just go and play it play by play. So that's what J.C. Shelton, who works for the Players Lounge, said Jacob Hardy, a walk-on running back, said that Kirby Smart told him. So that's like 3 layers of hearsay, if you get my point, in terms of all of this. Now, it's worth pointing out our next guest, Mike Griffith, asked Kirby Smart about that on Tuesday night, last night. Smart kind of denied or at least did not Smart did not seem to know what he was talking about there on that. So apparently Kirby Smart disputes the idea that a sports psychologist convinced him not to do what Jacob Hardy said that he did. So Smart's recollection of that's perhaps a little bit different. But last night, Smart did talk about the kind of different halftime message than some people sort of thought that it would be. And once again, this is really interesting. Smart's idea about not screaming at him, not giving him the I want you to eat style version of Kirby Smart, which we've heard in years past, but a little bit more measured, calm take on this. This is Smart's explanation for why he did it that way, and this is from last night.
I have varying messages at halftime. I mean, it just depends on how we're playing, what's going on, if we're playing with emotion, not playing with emotion. I mean, there's a lot of decisions to go into how you approach it. At that time, I don't know what good getting on was going to do.
So I have no idea if a sports psychologist told him that or not. If Smart came up with that on his own, I probably don't even really care all that much. It seems like it was the right choice, though, right? Especially if you watch the full context of the video, what Smart said and the, take it moment by moment and, win play by play, whatever it was that that Smart chose to say, it seems like it was the right choice. And the idea of a coach, and admittedly, I do think we just completely overrate the role that motivation plays in terms of how games are won and lost. I think coaches are very comfortable having that conversation, and I don't oftentimes think it reflects the actual truth, what's happening on a football field. So I do think motivation is slightly overrated. But just because it's overrated doesn't mean that it doesn't matter at all. And it clearly is a factor in how games are decided, especially when you have to dig deep and find something in you that you don't know that you have when you're losing a game. The feeling around a game that you're losing is totally different. You've got to completely find something new about yourself in a situation like that. So Smart says, hey, I vary my message. Sometimes maybe it is appropriate to get on you and yell at you and get you fired up. Other times it may be appropriate to kind of calm you down and get you ready to kind of emotionally go out there and relax and do what needs to be done on a per-play basis. Either way, Smart seems to be very good at kind of knowing what works in specific moments, and obviously Saturday it worked out really well for Georgia, and a huge credit to the SEC Network for the great job they did of kind of laying out that full story for us to all see. It's about as fascinating as anything you're going to get a chance to experience, and the kind of cool access that we sometimes get now that we years ago did not used to get. That is around the DawgHouse, and it's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And, of course, college football being back, and we're in the midst of the season right now. Y'all know how much we love that, and you know how much I love Dr. Pepper there as well. I'm so proud of the fact that my favorite soft drink is such a big part of college football. I don't think there's any organization, company more connected to college football than our friends at Dr. Pepper are. So when you're getting ready to enjoy game day this upcoming weekend, stop by your local Kroger, wherever you shop for your groceries, and get your own case, your own hookup with Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar, the brand new Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, whatever option you want, get ready for that to enjoy on game day because it's rich, it's flavorful. It truly is, as we say around here, the one fans deserve. So make sure you try yourself some Dr. Pepper here for game day here this weekend. It's great to have Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the DawgHouse here today. Now, before we are done on today's show, I told you this. We have probably the most interesting conversation to date, perhaps anyway, that we've had with Jake Fromm. That's coming up. Jake getting really into some of the offensive issues for Georgia, the concerns, what's real, what's not, what matters, what doesn't, from the perspective of someone who's been in that role. And Jake will also give us some really candid insight on what it's like to be under the microscope, the way that we have a tendency to put, quarterbacks and coaches and things like that. Jake will give us some very candid stuff on that here coming up in just a little bit there as well. Also, there are some fascinating rumors out there as it relates to the Alabama quarterback situation. This thing is not slowing down anytime soon. The Alabama-Ole Miss game on Saturday, fascinating for a number of reasons. We're going to get more on that before we're done today there as well. But for now, the latest on everything as it relates to Georgia, battling through a lot of injuries, looking forward to reshuffle the offensive line and get ready to go back to work here this Saturday. Let's cover all of that with Mike Griffith. It is a Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update, getting a report from Georgia practices and its preparation for UAB here on DawgNation Daily today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So it's a comeback win for Georgia against South Carolina, now moving on to UAB. Mike Griffith talks about that with us here in our Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update. So, Mike, before you join us, we kind of went through the sort of fascinating process of what happened for Georgia at halftime on Saturday. Incredible video from the SEC Network, which I think all fans enjoy. A little bit of, I don't want to say dispute, but perhaps a different recollection of kind of what led to that speech based on what a Georgia walk-on player named Jacob Hardy said, and Kirby Smart, who last night interacted with you on this, seemed to remember things a slightly different way. Whatever the story is, kind of how all that comes together, it's really pretty fascinating. And I guess the choice to sometimes you want to just be at your highest fever pitch, halftime of Florida back in 2021, an example of that. On Saturday, a little bit more calm and measured. It is interesting to see which club Kirby chooses to pull out of the bag in different situations like that. And, I don't know. I just find the access to the locker room stuff really pretty fun to see. What do you think we learned from Georgia with the way that it did respond after it got down on Saturday?
Well, obviously this coaching staff is crackerjack. They made some fantastic. We learned a couple things. Number one, we learned Shane Beamer's a hell of a coach. They came in here, and I don't know about you, Brandon, but I was stunned. Give Beamer credit. Spencer Rattler might be the best quarterback in the league. You put him behind the Alabama, put him on Alabama, put him on Georgia. This guy's unbelievable. This kid made some throws. I was like, wow. We didn't see it last year against Georgia. We saw him beat Clemson. We saw him beat Tennessee. And doggone, those Gamecocks came in like they were going to beat Georgia. I was stunned. But, of course, Georgia's got a crackerjack coaching staff, incredible adjustments on offense and defense. And as Kirby pointed out, and Kirby's like, guys, we had drives of 14 and 11 plays. And only got 3 points. That's pretty hard to do. It's pretty hard to do, but you miss a field goal, a 28-yard field goal. You bog down in the red zone a little bit. In Kirby's mind, the game wasn't as lopsided as maybe it felt, or it wasn't as dire as maybe we felt it was. But that team had to focus and regroup and come from behind, and it probably wasn't the worst thing in the world. I think that, you grow from those adverse situations, and when you go through battles together and, you go through tough. I think about you and I working together. Think about some of those late nights that we've worked together on road trips and games and projects that we've had to do together, and you do enough of them together and you got confidence, like this riverboat cruise. I don't know what the hell's going to happen on the Tennessee River, Brandon, but I got confidence we're going to find a way to get that boat back to shore and be at the game because of everything we've been through, right? Because we've got that experience. Well, now this team has got some experience together, and I think it can be a galvanizing experience in the long run.
No, I think that's an interesting way to say that. Obviously, Kirby made reference to the Missouri game. That would have been the version of that from a year ago. And I think the only point that I've made this week and tried to make this week about the South Carolina game, Mike, is is I'm not all that interested in kind of like the why of what's going on with the Georgia offense right now in terms of, well, it's this guy's fault or if it's this thing's fault, lack of possessions, whatever else. I'm not necessarily all that willing to diagnose like why something is true. I just simply want to point out the what here, which is moving forward, Georgia needs more explosive plays. They need more of kind of those big home run type things that were the hallmark of this offense the last couple of years, because when you have possessions, you want to make the most out of them, and it's the explosive plays that in the last couple of years, national championship level offenses that have allowed Georgia to do that. And when you look for improvement from Georgia the rest of the season, which I fully believe that we will see, I believe that Georgia will play much better games than it did on Saturday. As that improvement comes, I believe the place that needs to come is through the explosiveness on offense. Now, Georgia measures this a slightly different way than I do, but just baseline simple, I think of that as like 20-yard or plus plays, those big kind of home run type things when you're picking up those 20-plus yard chunks. I believe that Georgia just needs more of those. No one last year in America had more than Georgia did, and getting at least kind of back on track with some of that, I believe that's one of the specific ways that I want to measure growth with this team as the season progresses.
Well, I think Stetson Bennett provided a preview and some insight for us at the championship celebration. And when he said that it's the X's and the O's and not the Jimmy, or excuse me, when he said it was the Jimmys and the Joes and not the X's and the O's. We'd all lauded Todd Monken as a genius. Well, those X's and O's that he pulled had been around for a long time, and he'd coached many other places without the same sort of success. And I would tell you that's the difference in the offense right now. It's the players, not the plays. Ladd McConkey's not out there. Okay, Kenny McIntosh is in the NFL. Darnell Washington is in the NFL. Stetson Bennett, is with the Rams in their organization, the guy that can extend plays and do some things in the red zone. It's different players. You don't have a first-round left tackle anymore protecting the blind side. You've got a third-time starter that we saw, not a third-year starter. And an injured Brock Bowers looks a lot more like Clark Kent than Superman these days, dealing with this groin. You give Brock Bowers 7 catches last year, Brandon, he'd have about 154 yards and 2 touchdowns. This year, 7 catches, 54 yards. Dom Lovett, 7 catches, 56 yards. They're not killing people they're not breaking the tackles. They're not running away from anybody. They're not getting, Arian Smith, 4 years in the program, 1 catch for 5 yards? I mean, I get it, Ra Thomas is new, but Arian's been in the program 4 years, so this development that we hear about, it's the players. You got to have better. Dejon Edwards, he's a nice player. Don't think he's going to be on your fantasy football team anytime soon. He's not James Cook, he's not DeAndre Swift. He's a decent runner, but he's not. Dylan Bell's been a wonderful surprise. My goodness, give him the ball 12 or 15. I love that guy. But it's the players. It's the players. It's not the plays. Like Kirby said, it's the same plays that are being called, but the players aren't executing with the certain level of expertise. Oscar Delp's come a long way, but he ain't blocking like Darnell Washington did. I can tell you that. So, these guys have to grow. They get experience. And as Bobo goes, working under what Kirby tells him, because Kirby controls run-pass ratio, personnel, you kind of figure things out and say, all right, let's evolve. Who are we? How is Georgia going to do it? And let's think this, too. Stetson had the benefit. If he had 2 or 3 series where he crapped out, that defense was forcing 3-and-outs, too. He's back on the field in a minute. This defense isn't doing that. I mean, they're good, but they're not as dominant as they've been. So it's going to be a little bit more of a grind. It's going to be a little bit more hard work. I think you got one more blowout, one more scrimmage here to work some things in, and it's going to be a battle at Auburn. And it's going to be tough against Kentucky. You get a vacation there with Vandy and a bye week, and you'll beat the Gators up pretty good. And then comes the final exam in November.
One of the things that has been talked about a lot this week, and rightly so, is the really, really growing injury list for Georgia right now. And a lot of these are names that matter. Marius Mims, a very important player on this Georgia team. Lingering issues when it comes to running backs. Javon Bullard sounds like he's still got a little bit of a ways to go here. And in the case of Ladd McConkey, boy, that really does seem like that's going to be a lingering thing here right now. I think this is the kind of thing that obviously Georgia's not going to use this as an excuse, but it is an issue. It's an issue to be dealt with here right now, and there's a lot of shufflings of the deck going on, it seems like right now, that you can't deny the impact that the injury report seemingly is having on Georgia here at the moment.
No doubt. Shuffling the deck, Brandon. You're going down a road with a reference there I didn't like. But the shuffling of the deck is listen, the Kendall Milton injury is huge. You know, we all thought that Kendall, I shouldn't speak for everyone. I thought that Kendall was going to have 1,000, this was going to be a guy, this was going to be his breakout year. We've been waiting. This was going to be it. He was going to be healthy. Things were going to work out. This was going to be a bell cow. This was going to be a guy that was going to do huge, and he goes down. Oh, my goodness. Well, Branson Robinson's a guy we saw emerge at the end of last year, and we thought, well, he'll be okay. Well, now he's not there. And then we had hopes. We'd heard in fall camp that Andrew Paul was coming along, and we all were impressed with him. And, well, now he's not there either. So you're really left with Dejon Edwards, Dylan Bell, and Cash Jones. And their storylines, are great, but, if you're going to line them up and pick in the backyard, I'm not sure how those guys would rank among some of the best running backs in the nation, right? So that's a problem. And then the Ladd McConkey is just, like you said, that's huge. Ladd is super explosive. First team All-SEC pick with good reason, good to see. But he's really the straw that stirs the drink. I mean, you get a guy like that can take the top off, and defenses have to worry about him. And that just opens everything up underneath for everyone else. So, you hate to say it, but you look out there and you say, man, Donnie Mitchell, sure would be nice to still have him. Maybe even Jermaine Burton. Some people might argue that, but Jermaine's leading Bama. And you measure them against your transfers. And I think Lovett's coming along, maybe not quite as explosive as I thought he would be, but some of that has to do with his usage. And, we're starting to see some things out of Ra-Ra, but, you need to. I mean, he was Mississippi State's leading receiver, so I think there's still room for growth. I think Georgia will get better as the year goes on. That's one thing Kirby's teams always do. But in trying to understand what's happened, I think it comes down to some of those really key players like Kendall Milton, like Ladd McConkey, being out right now.
It's our Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update with Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, when it comes to your auto coverage, your home coverage, maybe perhaps life insurance, you want more than just an insurance policy. You want the people that you're working with to kind of understand about your life. Well, there's no better way to have the understanding of the things that you need specific for your life than people who are living life much like you are right here in the state of Georgia. We always say when it comes to Georgia Farm Bureau that they're always the home team. What we mean when we say that is their agents, their volunteers, the members, they're right here in the state of Georgia doing life just like you are here in our great state. They love college football the same way we do. They also love providing you great service when it comes to your auto insurance, your home insurance, things of that nature. So I want you to check them out online. It's gfbinsurance.com, gfbinsurance.com. When you want to do business with an insurance company that knows that you want more than just an insurance policy, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are the place to turn for that. Always the home team. Find them online, gfbinsurance.com for a lot more on that. That is gfbinsurance.com. Mike, I'm going to finish with this here today. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges that Georgia's currently facing here, and it's been talked about, but I think it needs to be talked about more, is what's happening along the offensive line, both in terms of the fact that Amarius Mims is injured, but also from the standpoint that I don't know this offensive line yet has been quite as dominant as I expected it to be. I thought this was going to be one of Georgia's best strengths thus far this season. That probably up till now hasn't necessarily been the case here. So I'm curious for you, with Mims sidelined now for at least a few weeks, how would you advise Georgia in terms of, is it Blasky or Truss at tackle? Is it, Dylan Fairchild getting a longer look here at the guard spot? As Georgia's kind of moving some pieces around here to try to figure out who its best five is with the five guys they have healthy right now, how would you advise Georgia to do that?
Depends on the matchup, and it, really does. Obviously, this week we're going to get to see a few different lineups up front, and they're going to get to experiment, and as Kirby said, see what the five best are. I'm just not sure, where this Georgia offense is going to end up, and so much of it, and that sounds like a cop-out, Brandon, but I want to see what happens when Ladd McConkey comes back. Look, you take any great receiver out of any offense at any level. You take a go-to guy, right? Take Christian McCaffrey away from the 49ers, or we've seen the difference in what Brock Bowers, maybe being a little bit more banged up looks like compared to when he's healthy. It changes the dynamic of a team when a guy goes out. That's that special. And if Georgia's going to have to run the football, I was impressed with Dylan Fairchild at guard and Xavier Truss. I heard a lot of people say that. They thought that the run game really kind of kicked in a little bit. But when it comes to pass protection, Mims was really good there. And I don't know, maybe Blasky's the answer and Trust back inside. So it kind of depends on, what the identity is. And what's tricky about Georgia, it's kind of a luxury. It's a good problem to have, is that the offense changes from week to week. They're kind of a chameleon. They kind of decide, and this is the way Kirby wants it, right? Because he knows it's really hard for defenses to get dialed in. Trent Dilfer was talking about that. It's like playing in the NFL. Every week you're playing a team that could have a lot of different personalities because of the personnel and the level of expertise and coaching. And what is Georgia this year? Are you, good question for you. Is this a passing team or is this a running team? Kirby will tell you those short passes are mimicking a run, but that's not the downhill game we're used to. So I think Georgia's identity continues to evolve. What are they really good at? Right now they're still trying to do what the other team's bad at. How are they going to match up at Auburn? What's Kirby going to do there on the road, hostile environment? To me, that's going to be a fascinating scene to see how Carson Beck handles that. And one other thought I'll leave you with, Brandon. With the inability to run the ball in a conventional manner, does this make you want a quarterback that runs it a little bit more? Could we see Carson Beck do a little bit more of that? And if you're Kirby Smart, how much work do you give Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton? Just in case. Do you bring those guys in the third quarter like you did in the first game? Because you kind of brought them in a little later against Ball State. So I don't know. My ears are perked up and my eyes are wide open. It's still an undefeated number 1 ranked team, and everything's there for you. But seeing Georgia down 14-3 at halftime was, I got to admit, it was a little sobering. It was a little bit of a reminder just how tough this league can be. And if you're just a little bit off, missed field goal or red zone issue, next thing you know, you're down quick in this league.
Mike, good stuff. We appreciate you being here as part of a Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update. We'll look forward to reading more from you at DawgNation.com. And see you in Athens on Saturday.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so we're going to have Jake Fromm here coming up in a minute. We'll get more into some of the stuff that's going on with Georgia. Really good insight from Jake on that here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, though, let's go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, boy, one of the things I'm excited about is that Dawg Nation cruise coming up in April of 2024, going to be on board Allure of the Seas. It's an Oasis-class ship. So what that means is our Dawg Nation cruise this year going to be bigger and better than it's ever been before. Not only do we have more specially themed Dawg Nation events, but also it's the entertainment and the special dining and all the cool bars and lounges that a larger cruise ship like the Allure of the Seas gives us a chance to provide. I'm talking about the Aqua Theater on the back of the ship. That means you're watching the high diving show and stuff like that, which you're amazed to even know can take place at sea, or the very special neighborhoods like the Central Park to go along with the Royal Promenade and the boardwalk area, which is like being Coney Island. It's like when you're doing all this stuff, you almost forget you're at sea because the ship is so big. It's got so many various options. It's one of the reasons why we want you there. Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. She's got a website for you, royaldawgs.com. You can go to it, and you can be a part of our Dawg Nation cruise. And then Jessica can also tell you about the really cool stuff as it relates to the port we're sailing out of, Port Canaveral, and another Oasis-class ship. In fact, the newest Oasis-class ship, Utopia of the Seas, which debuts in July of 2024. And this is the thing I'm so excited about because I love the commitment that Royal Caribbean is making for fun, family-oriented vacations that are kind of like the 4-night deal going out to Port Canaveral. For those of us here in the Atlanta area, that's the most convenient port to get to. And putting the nicest, newest Oasis-class ship in Port Canaveral for the 3 and the 4-night sailings is just a really cool thing. And starting in July, that's what's going to be going down. So Jessica can tell you all about that. Call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Or email her jslaterdreamvacations.com for more on that. All right, let's talk here a little bit about some of the stuff happening around the SEC. And this is the portion of the show where I probably am going to be just a little bit of a hypocrite because one of the things that I try to be careful about is I don't run with every Georgia rumor that's out there because, we thankfully have built a little bit of a platform here. We got a, good-sized audience each and every day. You can't just go out there and just sort of run with every nonsense thing that happens because, that hurts you in the long run to do that. You got to be pretty careful. So while I'm pretty careful about which Georgia rumors I do run with and don't run with. You got to be a little bit judicious about that. I'm generally pretty willing to kind of just throw whatever out there when it relates to some other SEC team. Not quite the same vetting process for a rumor involving other SEC teams as we perhaps have for Georgia. Admittedly, that's hypocritical, but you know what? We're also human beings, and that's just kind of the way that it goes. And let me tell you this. There is some fascinating stuff going on around the Alabama program here right now. And I would say that thus far, the most interesting team on the field this season has been Colorado. The TV ratings prove it. They had more than 9 million people tune in for a very late game against Colorado State this past Saturday. It's been fascinating. But for all the interesting Colorado on the field, the most interesting team in America right now off the field is the Alabama Crimson Tide. And a lot of this relates to quarterback stuff. I've heard some more chatter since I told you yesterday that, there were reports of the so-called Alabama players-only meeting. And I said oftentimes it sort of seems like players-only meetings, possible divisions within a team. Sometimes that can be various factions lining up behind various quarterbacks. And it seems like on Saturday that may have been true for Alabama. A lot of the Alabama players, rumor mill would have you believe, were not very happy about playing with Tyler Buchner as the starting quarterback. And perhaps Milroe not being in the game this past Saturday, the very odd, unorthodox decision to bench him after the Texas game, maybe some of that was related to his practice behavior upon, sharing some time, because obviously Alabama saw Milroe really struggle against Texas and, perhaps wanted to see, do we have the right quarterback? Milroe perhaps did not respond super well to that, rumor mill would have you believe. And, perhaps that kind of soured Nick Saban on Milroe here, but the other quarterbacks play poorly. And so now it seems like there really is a possible chance here that everybody else kind of is back on the same page again. Players want to play with Milroe. Perhaps Nick Saban now seems to fully understand that Milroe is the best option they have, but we also know, based on the way that he played against Texas, and frankly, based on the way that he's always played, Jalen Milroe is just a very limited player. There's only so much you're able to do with Milroe. But you have some fascinating quarterbacking rumors kind of taking place around the Alabama program. By the way, some of the Lane Kiffin stuff from this week is not dying down very much either, especially when you consider, okay, well, Kiffin was kind of making all these outlandish claims about who's actually running the Alabama defense, keeping in mind that his defensive coordinator is Pete Golding, the guy who was the Alabama DC a year ago. So a lot of back chatter amongst coaches, I guess, and maybe some axe to grind when it comes to Golding and his former, boss, Nick Saban. That's pretty interesting, too. I will give you our official thoughts as the week goes on. I kind of like Alabama to bounce back this week. I do. I think Alabama's a pretty limited team, but I also think that Lane Kiffin's a clown. And I think doing as much talking prior to this game as Kiffin has done, this is the act of an unserious person. And if Kiffin was serious about actually trying to win this game or even keep it close in Tuscaloosa, he'd be nose to the grindstone, his head would be down, and that's not where Kiffin is. So I think that gives you an idea that his best chance to kind of stir the pot and talk trash is before the game, not after the game. That would lead me to believe that Kiffin already knows he's likely to lose, and so therefore he's just stirring it up prior to the game to get the attention that he seems to so desperately crave. But on the Alabama part of this, while Alabama's not great, they're also not going to completely fall apart yet, I don't believe. It seems like they probably do have a little bit of a vibe refresh with Milroe back in there. The quarterback the players clearly seem to want to play for. My early expectation is, we'll get more into this as the week goes on, my early expectation is a little bit of a bounce back this week from an Alabama team that legitimately has some problems, but perhaps not so many problems they can't handle Ole Miss on Saturday. I mentioned Deion in Colorado a moment ago. Perhaps you've seen this. So Deion Sanders at a press conference this week stepped up to defend the Colorado State player that took what is probably a little bit of a dirty hit on Travis Hunter. Hunter, the tremendous player for Colorado State, obviously went to Collins Hill, going to be out a few weeks here. The player that hit Hunter, and I apologize for not remembering his name, but the player that hit Hunter has been getting some death threats and things like that. Allegedly, Deion Sanders stepped up to say, hey, he shouldn't be treated that way. We forgive him. Travis forgives him. We're kind of moving on, essentially using Deion's fame and attention as a little bit of a block and a little bit of a shield against the Colorado State player. I think that's a really classy gesture by Deion Sanders. And look, when you're getting as much attention as Colorado's getting, 9 million people watching a game with Colorado State, that's an unforeseeable number in terms of national attention on Deion here right now. It's important to note that nothing ever goes viral without a certain degree of controversy. Things that everybody agrees upon, they don't go viral, right? It's like, think about, like, say, Kyle Whittingham for a moment. Whittingham's the Utah coach. Put 100 college football fans in a room. Almost everybody has the same opinion of a guy like Kyle Whittingham. He's a really good coach, gets a lot out of his talent, but not quite good enough recruiter to really be an elite level coach. Like 100 people, pretty much everybody thinks the same thing about Kyle Whittingham. Therefore, no take about Whittingham ever goes viral. Nothing involving Whittingham ever goes viral. He is a coach that everybody agrees on. There are some coaches that just sort of, they are what they are, and there's very little controversy around them, and so therefore they never go viral. In Deion's case, he's gone incredibly viral. Huge ratings for ESPN's College Game Day. The Rock was there. A big ratings for a very late night game. And nothing ever goes viral without a certain degree of controversy around it, right? So some people, the glitz, the glamour, the flash, that's a little too much for some people. But keep in mind that in addition to all of that, there's also a lot of substance with Deion. Deion has a lot of, I guess I'll just call it this way, a lot of working class sensibility. Deion has a lot of sort of homespun logic that seems to make a lot of sense to a lot of people. Now, he may kind of put it in a little bit of a glitzy, glamorous package, but a lot of what Deion is selling is sort of old school coaching stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I think Deion has been as popular as he's been and gotten as much attention as he's gotten. Now, I still think the real story there is Shedeur Sanders more so than even Deion. But Deion's popularity is explained in part because he's kind of combining two things that don't always seem to go well together, which is sort of a glitzy, glamorous, gilded, persona with a lot of like sort of homespun logic, working class sensibilities. It's a very interesting, I guess, sort of cross-section of ideas that Deion seems to be putting out there right now, which is one of the things I sort of find pretty fascinating. I was going to give you some more thoughts on some of the other big games coming up this weekend. I'm running a little bit late, though, so let's go ahead and get into this because I thought it was a great conversation. We'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And without further ado, I want to get more into a really, really good conversation as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm. A lot on kind of where the Georgia offense is at this particular point and an evaluation of the current Georgia starting quarterback from a guy who's had that job before. You're going to like this from Jake Fromm right now here on DawgNation Daily. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for a Kroger Fresh Take as we get ready to talk to the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here today. Jake, appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the show, and hope that you are doing well.
Yeah, doing great, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
Well, obviously, good to have you on the program. And, it's been a hot topic here the last couple of days because, obviously, we have a tendency to dissect everything that happens with this Georgia football team. How they played Saturday against South Carolina, a lot of chatter in particular about the quarterback, Carson Beck. I'm not sure how much of the game you got a chance to see, but how did you think that Carson performed on Saturday, and how did you think the Georgia offense around him also performed?
Yeah, I think it's the tale of two halves. We were actually traveling to Denver. I got to watch the first half, which wasn't so great, and we took off back and then watched the second half later. But, just two completely different, offenses, really, what it looked like. I thought the defense played really well. South Carolina got off to a fast start, had a great plan, great scheme going out, and they executed really well. Drive. But, from the offense, it's just, it looks like they're just so close. It's just one third down that holds them short or one drop ball or one just missed deep throw, and they're so close to really firing on all cylinders. But at the end of the day, they're still putting up points. They're averaging a high 30-point points per game this season, which compares very good to what they've done the last 3 years under Monken. So they're right there. Thought Carson played a lot better in the second half. Yeah, it was raining, so they threw a lot of swing passes left and right, and then was very conscious about their shots they took deep, but they ended up hitting a few. But I think they're close. I'm not fretting yet, but I think we would all love to see them come out to a little bit of a faster start.
I joked about the fact that we all have a tendency to sort of dissect all this so heavily and look at it in such a magnified way. You've obviously lived in that pressure cooker here as the Georgia starting quarterback. Like, how tiring does that get? And obviously you loved your time at Georgia, and Georgia fans loved you, but you know how it is. I mean, it's like we make a huge deal out of all this kind of stuff. It's one of the reasons why I have a job, right? It's like everybody makes a very big deal about everything that happens with Georgia football. And, like, you know, how tough is it to live under that microscope the way that you once did, the way that Georgia players are right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, when you are the quarterback at the University of Georgia, all eyes are on you. Everybody's waiting on you to go and make a play and take this team to the quote-unquote promised land and win another national championship. That's the goal. That's the expectation. And that's now the standard that they've built there at Georgia. So it's tough. There's a lot of weight on your shoulders. But I think what you kind of see them trying to do through the offensive plan is try to take a little bit off his plate. And just let him play kind of free and easy, and to just let him go complete balls. And I think they're close. I don't think Carson's doing a bad job by any means, but I think the guys around him can help him a little bit and make a play here and there.
So one of the things that's been kind of a continual theme here this season is getting off to a little bit of a slow start. You mentioned the first half on Saturday against South Carolina, and it's only been 3 games, so perhaps this is just a coincidence, kind of a random occurrence, but slow starts have been an issue in each of the 3 games here thus far. Do you think there's perhaps a specific reason for that, or do you think that's maybe just something that's happened and there's no larger meaning behind all of it?
I think it's because the identity of the team is still yet to be determined. They're still trying to figure out who they are, what they are. You know, what do you go back and rely on when you have a short third down? You know, is it a certain receiver? Is it a running back? Is it, hey, man, it doesn't matter. We're going to just go behind this offensive line and we're going to go get 2 to 3 yards. It doesn't matter. I think the identity is still yet to be determined, still up in the air, and I think they're just trying to figure it all out of who exactly they are as an offense.
So one of the things that kind of gotten some attention this week is Kirby Smart on Monday said, because fans have this perception, well, things are different now because Todd Monken's no longer here. And Kirby said this week that Georgia is still running the exact same offense that it's been running for the last few years. And for some fans, you know, the question they might perhaps ask in response to that is, well, how come it seems so different? So, Jake, I'm hoping you can help us all kind of make sense of this for the fans who are trying to kind of sift through this and make sense of this here right now. When Kirby says this is the exact same offense, what maybe specifically does he mean by that, and why is it that some fans would have the perception that, well, at least the results seem a little bit different right now, if not the actual operation of it seems different? Why do you think there's such a disconnect between what fans sometimes think they see and what Kirby Smart would say that he sees, especially on an issue like this?
Yeah, I want to try to be very delicate, saying this. I mean, the offense is there. It's the same X's and O's. I mean, obviously, the first thing you got to go is the play caller. I don't want to put anything on Bobo.
Sure.
I love Bobo. But, I mean, I think it's just an even more impressive of how impressive Monken was. He was dialing it up, man. He seemed like he had everybody's number, and it was always the perfect play call at the perfect time. And then, too, I just kind of felt maybe last year with Stetson, they just kind of hit a few more of these deep shots and were able to get things rolling a little bit early and kind of get the juices going. So I think a little bit of those two things, and then maybe not quite as a dominant offensive line play early to kind of help Carson and with this running game too. So there's a little bit of everything, but I 100% believe that it's the same offense. It's still the same X's and O's, still the same plays being implemented each and every week, but how you go about implementing them and then how you go about executing them too really plays a huge factor in the execution part on Saturday.
So Kirby was asked about Monday, something you brought up, kind of the absence of some of those shot plays, those deeper throws down the field. And one of the things that Kirby said in response to that is, well, if it's to use language that he would use like quarters coverages, or if there's a deep high safety or something like that, well, you can't just take a shot to take a shot. And obviously as a quarterback, you know that better than anybody else. But for someone like me who's not a former player, a former quarterback, and for maybe a lot of the folks who are listening, I think we're left to wonder, well, gosh, how do you ever take deep shots then? Or, if you only take what the defense gives you, then maybe you'll only ever have what the defense wants you to have, which are the kind of sort of small bites at the apple and not the kind of big explosive plays that really move you down the field. You know, Jake, as someone who makes decisions like this on the football field all the time, how do you balance the fact that the defense is trying to take the big throw away from you from the standpoint, well, if all you do is always just check down, then you may have a drive that eventually stalls out because you need those explosive plays to really put yourself in the end zone. As a quarterback, how do you balance that?
Yeah, so explosive plays, happen because guys are finishing. The guys around them are finishing. You get extra blockers downfield. Guy breaks the tackle. Obviously, everybody knows that the deep throw down the middle of the field. But the other part of this is you got to stay on schedule as an offense. You got to stay ahead of the down. You got to be executing on first and second down. Especially first down and getting, instead of getting 3-4 yards, you got to be getting 6-8 yards. So you're in a better rhythm, and then you're ahead of the down too to be able to go and take some of those shots as well. So that kind of plays a big factor in, if I'm a play caller and I got to get a first down, and right now we're not really that dominant on first down or whatever down it is to be able to call that shot, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to execute the next third and long we get. So that plays a big factor in it as well.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, when you're thinking about getting ready for game day and having the kind of money you want to spend on the tailgate items you need and the time you want to enjoy all the football that's on, one of the best ways to get more money back and more time back is with the brand-new membership opportunity from our friends at Kroger. It's called Kroger Boost, and right now you can try it for free for 30 days when you go to Kroger.com/boost. You get more money back because they're going to give you twice the fuel points when you're saving on the stuff you're already buying there at Kroger, and you can take advantage of free grocery delivery, things like that. A really convenient way to give yourself more money back, more time back to enjoy this football season. Try Kroger Boost right now online at Kroger.com/boost for more on that. That's Kroger.com/boost for more on that. So, Jake, in a couple of weeks, Georgia's going to see a team that I'm presuming you've seen a pretty good bit already this season. It's your brother's team, the Auburn Tigers, and it's on the road. And it seems like a lot of this right now, even the South Carolina game on Saturday, is a little bit of a, I don't want to say dress rehearsal because it's more serious than that, but it's certainly a tune-up to get ready for a big step up in play when you go into a hostile environment and you face a tough SEC rivalry-type game like that. Like, how much do you kind of view what's going to happen on Saturday against UAB as sort of the final step in all of that? And based on what you've seen from Auburn, how challenging do you think that road game can be 2 Saturdays from now?
I mean, I think it can definitely be a big challenge for them, because if they start slow again on the road, you don't have that extra environment factor to help get you back on rhythm and back on schedule. So that could definitely be a tough test, and it's going to be interesting to watch the nonverbal communication going on the road, being able to communicate, either in the loud circumstances or be able to signals, all the different things. So be firing on all cylinders as an offense, and I'm just hoping for a fast start.
And before we let you go, I definitely want to bring up your former teammate. Obviously, Monday night, I'm sure you maybe had a chance to see this on Monday Night Football, the horrible injury that Nick Chubb suffered. You were kind of, I guess, before you got to Georgia, him coming back in 2016, but we know he's been through tough injury circumstances before. How much does your heart, as just a football player but also a former teammate, how much does your heart go out to a guy like Nick, who everybody seems to love and obviously inspiring to so many of us because of the way that he plays the game, now forced to have to go through another very, very serious injury recovery?
Man, hate it. My wife and I were watching the game last night and saw it live, but man, just hate it for Nick. Nick's such a great dude, the ultimate competitor. Man, a few words, but man, on a football field, he just grinds it out. One of the best running backs, one of the best people, one of the best teammates I've ever been around. So, man, wish him all the best, praying for him, and hopefully to see him back out there soon.
That's well said, Jake. I'm glad you said that, and I appreciate your time here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take. Enjoy your week. We'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you back here on DawgNation Daily again very soon as well.
Yes, sir. Sounds good. Thank you, Brandon.
So glad to have Jake Fromm saying those words about Nick Chubb, and we continue our sincere prayers for him and his recovery. So happy to hear what I guess is kind of a positive prognosis. I know Kirby Smart talked about it a little bit last night, that his belief that Nick will be back better than ever. Obviously, it was a horrific scene on Monday Night Football, but if there's anybody who's got the toughness and the fortitude to kind of fight through something like that, it's a guy like Nick Chubb, who we've seen do that before. But no doubt, Dawg Nation really rooting for Nick Chubb as he goes through all of that. Nice to hear Jake Fromm say what he said there. Let me also give a quick shout out to my friends at the Finish Long Drink and the brand new peach-flavored version of the Finnish Long Drink. For a limited time right here in the Peach State, the peach-flavored version of the Finnish Long Drink, ready-to-drink cocktail right there in a can. You love that because if you like mixed drinks, it's a mixed drink. You don't have to mix yourself. It sort of looks like a beer because it's in a can, but it's not. It's a wonderful new category of beverage, and you can try the peach-flavored version. That's the hot thing right now, but the originals are also still doing some big things there, too. The Long Drink Cranberry, Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. I hear from a lot of you how much you love that. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. Long Drink Traditional, blue can, grapefruit flavor, gin kick. You love all of that. So find it online at thelongdrink.com and find out where you can pick up some of the brand new peach-flavored version of the Finnish Long Drink there today. All right, couple of golden shoes to give you on the way out the door here. We'll throw the first one up, and it's a good one to share with you. So Just Smitty sent this to me. He says, look what you can see in the suites here in Sanford Stadium. I noticed it in the fourth quarter today. So on the left, you see a view from Smitty's seats, but when you zoom in there closely, one of those nice luxury suites has got the neon sign that says HBTFD, kind of a play on one of the famous phrases from Kirby Smart. And if you know there, I guess, on that. So Smitty spotted that, sent that to us. Nice to see. A little personal touch inside one of those very nice luxury suites that the better half among us get a chance to enjoy. So that's kind of a cool thing to see. Just Smitty, appreciate you sharing that. And another golden shoe to give out there as well. Max sent this to us on Twitter. He says, this is how we celebrate a UGA win here in the Pacific Northwest. How about that? Is that salmon? Is that what that is? A couple of good-looking fish there being caught. So a good time by Max there celebrating a fun Georgia win. We'll give a golden shoe out for that, too, for a pretty good haul there, out catching some fish. That's pretty good stuff to see there as well. Lousy, stinking Gators, they are going to be on the hook come 38 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater countdown. We will see all of you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. All right, we've gone very long on comments the last few days. We are not going to go long today. We've got a lot to do, so I apologize in advance for that. But we're going to take some here for sure. DT says that's his suite, so there you go. DT living the nice life. You love to see that. Scott Harris says on the subject of Nick Saban, there is growing chatter out there, and we've been talking about this ourselves for quite some time too. The one thing we've always said is that Nick Saban will have zero tolerance for being Alabama's coach as a non-playoff level coach. The pressure of the job is just too much. And at one point in time years ago, Nick Saban had kind of briefly soured on Alabama fans, it would seem. That's one of the reasons that he flirted with possibly taking the Texas job. You know, I think he wanted Alabama fans to appreciate what they had. But all the championships that Nick Saban has won, that will not insulate him from future criticism the moment that Alabama, takes a step back. Now, that may seem incredibly unfair, and if you don't live entrenched in the world of SEC football, that may not even make any sense. But trust me, it is true that the criticism of Saban will be from within the Alabama fan base. It won't be, Georgia loudmouth like me. It's going to be Alabama people saying, well, maybe the game has passed him by, and maybe we need a brand new coach. He'll get more criticism and more scrutiny than he's ever gotten before, and that's annoying for anybody. It'll especially be annoying for someone like Saban who wants to say, hey, can you guys be grateful for what I've given you over the years? But I mean, there is a sense of, what have you done for me lately when it comes to the relationship the fans have with football programs, whether that should be or it shouldn't be, fair or not. There is a little bit of that, and Nick Saban may soon find out just how true that is. And if it is the case, even though I think Saban would probably like to coach as long as he possibly can, and I certainly understand that, I don't have any plans to ever retire. I'd like to work for the rest of my life, to be honest with you. I hope I'm healthy enough to be able to do it. And I think that in a normal situation, Saban would probably feel the same way. But in terms of having the patience to tolerate criticism because they've taken a step back here after such a long time of being the very best program in college football. Nick Saban will have almost no tolerance for that, and that would probably push him, I believe, into retirement. And I do believe that could come as soon as this year if this season progresses the way that it appears that it might. DT says HBTFD is his daily sign-on. Yes, indeed, DT, it sure is. West GA Dog fan would like to know how he thinks Eric Bieniemy is impacting the Washington Commanders' offense. Yeah, that's a good question. I would like to get into that, West GA, at some point in time. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk to Jake more about that at some point. DT at DawgNation.com also pointing out the fact that Saban just bought a very expensive, like $17.5 million house down there in Jupiter, Florida, which is a wonderful place to live. Obviously, a lot of PGA Tour professionals live down there. But if you push the golfers aside, the average age of everybody else living in Jupiter, Florida is about 90. Buying a very big, expensive home in Jupiter, Florida is not the act of a young man unless you're a PGA Tour golfer necessarily. So when you're, buying a home in Jupiter, when you're going on the McAfee show each and every week, kind of a regularly scheduled media appearance, sort of an audition for the next phase of your life, it sort of looks like to me. Nick Saban acts like a man who has one foot out the door. He definitely does. There's just no doubt about that. Let's see what else. Frederick Meredith says there's nothing wrong with Beck that experience can't fix. I think that's, for the most part, 100% true. And this is one of those things where if you're a fan who's kind of unsure of Carson right now, there is an extent to which some of that's just a little bit logical, right? It's like, people want to see with their own eyes before they become full, true believers. I get that. But until that happens, my advice to you as a Georgia fan would be to borrow the confidence that Kirby Smart and the Georgia coaches seem to have in Beck. They named him as the starter. That's the kind of thing they wouldn't have done unless they believed he truly did have a leg up in that competition. They clearly are saying very confident things about him and perhaps projecting confidence onto him, but they're saying confident things about him. And as Mike Griffith mentioned when he was on the show a moment ago, you go back to the Ball State game. That's a game that Georgia kind of had in hand. It was winning. Georgia did not play a ton of backup quarterbacks. I think they gave a series to Vandegrift and a series to Stockton. Right now, I think the more relevant question is how close is the competition between Vandegrift and Stockton than it is how close is either of those guys to Carson Beck. I think that, actions have a tendency to speak very loudly here, and Georgia is clearly operating right now as if Carson Beck is without question its starting quarterback. And maybe there may be some ongoing, competition between both Vandegrift and Stockton. But for now, Beck is the guy. And so that's the level of confidence that Georgia, I believe, has in him right now. And so my advice to Georgia fans would be, perhaps borrow some of that confidence from the Georgia coaches until you have seen enough with your own eyes to have that earned confidence with yourself. Make It Happen says, the way I look at it, give Beck time to get used to being a starter in the SEC. Bennett wasn't the best when he first started, so Georgia fans can calm down. Yeah, I think it's appropriate to have a calm and sort of measured belief and viewpoint on this, and I do think you're echoing a little bit about what a previous commenter said, which is that experience has the potential to eventually make Beck better. And I think that Beck, through 3 games, has actually been more good than not. I do think that. And to be even better, well, obviously experience can certainly help with that. Let's see what else. James Richards says, I've forgotten what a Georgia loss feels like. It is amazing. Georgia hasn't lost a regular season game since November of 2020. Is that right? Hasn't lost a game of any note of any kind since December of 2021. That's a long time to go without losing a football game. Only lost once in the last 2+ seasons. That's amazing. If Georgia had somehow figured out a way to win the SEC championship in 2021, which is obviously a woulda, coulda, shoulda, but just for the fun of conversation for a moment, if Georgia would have been able to win that game and everything else worked out the exact same way, Georgia would break the record for consecutive wins in college football history this season. That gives you an idea how just dominant the run that Georgia's been on. And I do think it's appropriate to appreciate it. Now, appreciating it doesn't mean you can't have a football-oriented conversation, but what you want to see the team do better, that's just the nature of being a fan, right? Appreciating it doesn't mean that you have to just sort of live in kind of like this, blissful, whatever all the time. It's okay to have a football conversation, but having a conversation about specific elements within this team right now also taking place within the framework of, my gosh, the winning we've gotten a chance to enjoy. Finding a way to kind of have room for both ideas is probably pretty important. Let's see what else. Let me go back up here and get a few more comments. Johnny Surf Dog predicts that Mekhi Muse could take another punt back on Saturday. I'd love to see that. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style talking about my NIL deal with cruises. If only I had one of those from Royal Caribbean. Frederick Meredith says Georgia's defense at full strength is national championship worthy. I believe that's probably true. Paul Moon and the idea of the so-called Disney dogs, as it can sometimes be described, sort of the delusionally optimistic fans. I just think it's important to know that the last couple of years, Georgia has given us reason to be almost nothing but, incredibly optimistic because of the success that Georgia has enjoyed. And I think it just sort of makes sense in life that unless you are given very, very concrete evidence to the contrary, having a more positive outlook than not probably is the better way to go through life, I think. Probably a little healthier, perhaps, maybe. All right, let me take one more kind of spin through the comments here across all platforms. Barry Watkins and Bill Sanders talking about the Braves and their race to have the best overall record in Major League Baseball. I think that matters. I don't know that it matters a ton because, just given the way that series can sometimes play out, you may not get a chance to have every home game in the series anyway. So ultimately, what I would rather Atlanta be is well rested for the playoffs, I think. Now, listen, baseball playoffs are a crapshoot. I mean, it is. Over the course of a 162-game season, I think that's a pretty good test of who the best team really is. You get to the postseason, almost anything can happen. And sometimes it works out to your benefit, and sometimes it doesn't. So I don't know that there is a perfectly tried and true, well-tested formula for how to succeed in the postseason. But given my best guess, if you told me right now Atlanta could have the best overall record and have home field advantage throughout, or if you told me Atlanta could be well rested, I'll take rest over home field advantage, I think. Let me get Kent Holcomb here, who says, let me get Kent here, who says, I feel we don't have as good a team as we had the last two seasons due to several reasons, one being inexperience, another being injury. I feel both will take care of themselves with the excellent coaching staff we have. Yeah, so I think that Kent's expressing a perspective that I think it's only honest to say that through 3 games this year, we certainly know less about Georgia than we knew through 3 games a year ago. After 3 games a year ago, I was pretty much ready to say this is the best team in college football. I think we haven't certainly learned nearly enough yet to say that, and perhaps you would say, well, right now, this team seems somewhat less than the last 2 national championship teams. Maybe that's the case, but you've also got 3/4 of the regular season still left to go in order to fix all of that, which I think is important to keep in mind. And I'm really plugged in right now as to how this team does that. I mean, I was kind of bored and ready to kind of move past the whoever was Georgia's playing, UT Martin and Ball State. I'm not bored by UAB on Saturday. I'm really not. I'm pretty fascinated by this. And then it's all SEC after that until you get to the end of the season. I mean, I feel like we're into a pretty good stretch this year now. Maybe the South Carolina game woke us all up. Hopefully, it gives Georgia the spark that it needs. But I feel like we've got some fun stuff on the horizon here. Randy Hall wondering for where Randy and Tifton is. I'm not quite so sure about that. It's a good question. Scott Harris says, I think who we play as Auburn is who we have for the year, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, Georgia's going to still be pretty – well, I don't know if it's for the whole year. I see the point you're making. Clearly, there are some guys that are not coming back for Auburn. You'd probably be led to believe. Certainly Mims is the easiest one on that, perhaps a few more there as well, which means that they're not coming back for the first SEC road game. That means that there's some sort of indefinite timeline as far as how long their injuries are going to last, which means they probably last for a little while longer. I think that's probably true. But last year, A.D. Mitchell, when he finally did come back, paid huge dividends for you when he did. That, if Mims can kind of come back and be reinserted even late in the season, think about how big a late insertion was Mims a year ago playing in place of Warren McClendon. That late insertions into a lineup can make a big deal here. Ladd McConkey could be this year's version of A.D. Mitchell. Maybe he comes back sooner than that. Arian Smith was kind of a late insertion into the rotation a year ago. He paid big dividends too. So that's obviously the most positive possible, assessment of all of this is that Georgia eventually gets folks back much, much healthier and just much more ready to go. We certainly hope that is the case. We'll obviously take more of your comments tomorrow. We got to go for now, though. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Water heater goes out. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. We'll also see Dari Payro and our friends from R.S. Andrews this Friday for Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Always a fun thing to do there. So we'll see you then for that. Back here tomorrow, though, for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, 9:45 for our first and 15, 10 a.m. everywhere after that. We'll look forward to talking to you then.